My research brings together philosophy of mind and evolutionary psychology to study birth from consciousness point of view. And today I will show how the science of consciousness can promote the science of birth. When we talk about consciousness, we are not just referring to being awake. We are talking about the texture of experience, how it feels from the inside to be alive, embodied, to be you. My research focuses on altered state of consciousness, moments when the texture of experience shifts. An altered state of consciousness is a temporary and noticeable change from normal waking awareness, involving alterations in perception, emotion, thought, or behavior. This definition distinguishes these experiences from many everyday experiences. People can experience altered state of consciousness in many situations. For example, during meditation, hypnosis, dreaming, drug use, or intense sports activities. These states have been widely studied across the cognitive sciences. While childbirth is one of the most intense altered states known to humans, it is absent from consciousness research. The evidence that birthing women have unique phenomenological experiences during physiological birthing is discussed mostly in the fields of midwifery and anthropology, mostly in qualitative studies. Thus, I have coined the term birthing consciousness and analyzed its cognitive and phenomenological features. That birthing consciousness is a psychophysical state of retreat into which a woman sometimes enters during physiological birth. It is a deeply positive state of calm, focus, and reduced pain. As labor intensifies, language fades and attention turns inward. The woman may enter a healthy dissociative state, timeless, detached from surroundings to varying degrees, fully absorbed in the act of birth. In an attempt to describe the unique experience of focused attention, women have used expressions such as being in the zone or on another planet. Women who experienced focused attention during their birth also experienced less effective pain. As labor intensifies, women modify their pain experience by focusing. Now, there are many studies about the massive neurofunctional and neuroanatomical changes in the maternal brain during pregnancy and after birth. However, scholars understand and analyze maternal brain modifications only in terms of adaptations for pregnancy and motherhood, overlooking the crucial connecting event, the birth itself. So ignoring the event of birth reflects an underlying assumption that the brain is not preparing for the event of childbirth, only for what follows, motherhood. Well, I'm a philosopher, not a brain scientist, so in my theoretical research, I have tried to offer a hypothesis concerning the brain mechanism of birth and consciousness. How can we understand this phenomenon in neuroscientific terms? So many altered states of consciousness are thought to happen because the brain temporarily quits its higher control centers. This is called transient hypofrontality. In simple terms, the thinking parts of the brain step back for a while, allowing more basic, body-centered processes to take the lead. My hypothesis was that birth and consciousness relies on a similar brain mechanism to other altered states of consciousness, namely transient hypofrontality, since many altered states show this temporary downregulation of frontal activity. And since birth and consciousness shares similar cognitive and phenomenological features, it is reasonable to assume that the same mechanism is at play here. If the neural mechanism underlying physiological birth is hypofrontality, what does it imply about the environmental, mental, and biochemical factors that support this mechanism? Aspects supporting the transient hypofrontality brain mechanism are low lights, freedom to choose an activity and body position, soft voices, and familiar and friendly accompany. The mental aspects are associated with calmness, withdrawing within as labor intensifies, less effective pain, less fear, and less anxiety. Alongside the acute pain, the birthing woman experiences exhilaration rather than suffering. And of course, we have birth hormones, as we heard before. This allows the birth process to function at its optimal level. Of course, one can ask, why does it matter? Many think that today, women in the Western world should use all the medical technology available during birth. After all, we have the privilege of giving birth in a modern hospital instead of in a dangerous prehistoric environment, which is to say that physiological childbirth in the modern world doesn't make sense anymore. Well, I don't claim that all medical interventions are flawed, of course not. However, it's important to note that epidural use increases the risk of instrumental and emergency cesarean birth, which are linked to postpartum mental health issues and slower recovery. These procedures can be both physiologically and psychologically traumatic, contributing to the rising global rates of postpartum mental illness. So there is a point in promoting more physiological birth. However, I will show that today's typical birth environment often, though unintentionally, goes against physiological birth by interrupting the natural flow of birth in consciousness. Here are typical interruptions to birth in consciousness. Environmental factors that are known to activate neocortex activity include bright lights, loud voices, and even the feeling of being observed, as we heard, many things combined. Psychological interference stems from stress, nervousness, and anxiety, all of which raise the risk of dysfunctional labor, lack of care and support during childbirth, or even anxious birth environment associated with more medicated birth. As for the hormones, the environmental and psychological factors trigger interruptions to birth and consciousness by causing a physiological disturbance, either a release of stress hormones or prevention of the release of birthing hormones. All of these factors may lead to dysfunctional labor or failure to progress, which means that birth and consciousness is a fragile psychophysical state because it is highly sensitive to psychological and environmental interruptions. But why is it so fragile? Well, because birthing is a complex physiological, psychological, social, and cultural event. And in other words, birthing has a highly intense dynamic of feedback loops, as Liz said yesterday. When we're talking about feedback loops, what are those feedback loops? Feedback loop is a way to describe a circular effect of several parts in a system on one another. They are used for analyzing systems with complex dynamics, and they can amplify the event in either a positive or negative direction. And indeed, birthing experiences are polarized. For example, the mental state after a positive physiological birth resembles those experiences during intentional pain activities, such as running a marathon. However, negative birth environments are linked to poor mental health in postpartum. So what can we do in order to navigate the polar experience of birthing to their more positive pole? How can the science of consciousness can promote the science of human birth? I found there are many similarities between extreme ends of experiences in birthing and psychedelic experiences. The similarity lies in the brain mechanism, transient hypofrontality, the intense internal dynamics, feedback loops, and the extremity of the altered states of consciousness, ranging from profoundly positive and empowering to deeply negative or even traumatic. The theory that explains this in the context of psychedelic use, good trip versus bad trip, is the set and setting framework. I suggest that the same explanation that is true for the psychedelic experience might be possible also for the birthing experience. But to understand the theory of set and setting, we first need to go back to the beginning of psychedelic research. In the 50s, the Western world discovered psychedelics, leading to nearly 2 decades of intensive research and a surge of clinical publications. But here is an interesting thing about those studies. When looking at the articles published in those years about psychedelic substances, it is unbelievable that the studies deal with the same substance. Results obtained in these experiments produced conclusions that contradict one another. The fact is that there were 2 polar perspectives back then concerning psychedelic substances, and these perspectives affected the design of the experiments, the results, and the interpretations. The 2 research traditions reached opposite conclusions. While psychomimetic studies claimed that LSD, for example, causes psychosis, anxiety, and cognitive impairment, psychedelic studies argued that it promotes healing, euphoria, and enhanced perception. And both sides had data to prove their point, raising the question, what is the real effect of these substances? The answer to this riddle is that the effect of the psychedelic substances is not uniform, but depends on the individual and the situation. The theory of set and setting argues that peak experiences are shaped by the mindset of an individual entering the experience, which is the set, and by the environment in which the experience takes place, which is the setting. In the set parameters, we have personality, preparations, expectations, and intentions. And in the setting parameters, we have the physical environment, the people around, and the cultural context. There are negative set and setting conditions and positive set and setting conditions. It was found that with the proper set and setting conditions, people reported a positive altered state of consciousness experiences, and even that their lives have been changed for the better. So it is known that negative set and setting conditions combine rigidity, unfamiliarity, and non-acceptance, while positive set and setting conditions combine flexibility, familiarity, and acceptance. So here you can see how set and setting differed between experiments in the 50s and the 60s, depending on the researcher's approach. In the psychedelic studies, participants expected something new and exciting. They were in a pleasant, supportive environment, and researchers explained that the experience could be sometimes intense or even scary, but they reassured them one-on-one support would be there. In contrast, in the psychomimetic experiments, participants had almost no preparation, and there was little or no support during the session, sometimes even the opposite. So, not surprisingly, the experiences ended up pointing in opposite directions. And I think you can already see the analogy. The same kind of polarization appears in childbirth experiences as well, arising from 2 very different approaches to what birth is and how it should be managed. And here is my hypothesis. The same set and setting key parameters shape psychedelic experiences and birthing experiences. Now let's go through each of the key elements of set and setting, and I'll explain why I believe they are just as relevant to shaping birthing experiences as they are to shaping psychedelic experiences. As for preparations, there are automatic physiological preparations for birth, and we already know quite a lot about the biochemical ones. But I suggest that there are also brain changes that prepare women for physiological birth. Neuroscientific studies show opposing changes in gray matter volume during pregnancy and after birth. During pregnancy, there is a reduction in gray matter volume, which may actually reflect the brain's preparation for birth, a kind of neural streamlining that helps shift the mother into a more embodied, less cognitive state of consciousness. After birth, we see a gradual increase, again, possibly reflecting recovery and neural reorganization. Yet, as I mentioned, in these studies, the event of birth itself is not mentioned as a possible explanation. Another interesting finding is the alterations that were found during the processing of fear and anxiety signals in early versus late pregnancy. Researchers note that heightened sensitivity to fear and anxiety during pregnancy may be evolutionary adaptive, enhancing maternal protection of both self and the fetus. Some researchers suggest that reduced processing of fear and anxiety in late pregnancy reflects a basic mechanism that protects the fetus from maternal stress. I suggest another possible explanation, complementary. Since fear and anxiety can disrupt labor and increase complications, the brain may gradually dampen the processing of threat signals towards the end of pregnancy to protect the physiological birth process. This could explain why responsiveness to threat decreases from the second to third trimester. Think about how long people train in meditation to reach an altered state of consciousness, I mean naturally, without substance use. Every midwife and doula, and all of you, I imagine, will tell you that they know that moment when a woman in labor shifts into another state of consciousness, almost another world, and it happens even if she has never practiced meditation in her life. I claim that during birth, women's brains are already wired to enter such a state spontaneously if only the conditions allow it. As for intentions and expectations, we have empirical evidence that the birthing women's beliefs and perceptions regarding the birth process affect both the mode of birth and the subjective experience of birth. But of course, women's expectations don't develop in a vacuum. They are shaped by the cultural stories we grow up with about what birth is and what it should be. This connects us to the cultural setting. Common descriptions of childbirth in popular media, such as films and reality birth programs, preserve a more medical approach to childbirth. Birth in women's bodies are presented in media as incapable of physiological birthing, thus requiring technological and medical interventions. In contrast, more physiological births are generally absent from this media. As for physical setting, we have empirical evidence that physical birth environment can support physiological birth or hinder it. Even small changes in the birth room design, such as removing the birth bed, or hiding unnecessary medical equipment, are correlated with a more physiological birth. Concerning the factor of social support, we have empirical evidence that one-on-one support decreases the rate of various medical interventions. It was also found to be associated with higher satisfaction and a positive birth experience, and it can increase women's sense of agency during childbirth. Unfortunately, medicalized obstetric system does not always support women's autonomy and preferences. As for the factor of freedom and choice, freedom to move is central to a woman's sense of agency. Lying flat when not her choice is usually far less comfortable than being upright. Still, even birthing women without epidurals are sometimes forced to give birth while lying on their backs. Therefore, as we saw, childbirth too can unfold under positive or negative set and setting conditions. When the environment is rigid or unsupportive, when women are denied movement, privacy, or continuous care, one-on-one care, these negative conditions can disrupt the natural physiological process. This figure shows the set and setting theory concerning the birth arena. Of course, there are objective features one cannot control, such as personality and objective medical conditions, but this is not a reason to be fatalistic about the childbirth process or to add extra routine medical interventions. There is a lot to be done to safely navigate the childbirth experience physiologically and psychologically. So the science of consciousness reminds us that non-medical factors are not peripheral. They create the state itself. During birth, the birthing woman responds immediately to the set and setting. Thus, concerning the optimal management of birth process, set and setting are crucial factors we must deal with instead of denying. So what I suggest is a conceptual shift. Instead of trying to control birth by hyper-medicalization of it, we can design the birth set and setting so it would have the optimal conditions for optimal birth experiences. Now, a word about the common attitude towards the pursuit of a positive birth experience. The historical decrease in childbirth mortality may lead many people to undervalue the importance of a positive birth experience. The birth experience is referred to sometimes as a modern privilege, which is to say that a positive experience is nice to have, but if you didn't have one, just say thanks that you didn't die, as in old times. Well, sure, on a fundamental level, it is a factual truth, but one can ask if modern medicine is currently only about life and death. I think it is also about health and well-being. And I also would like to ask, is birth experience just a modern privilege? I argue that no, it really affects the birth process and birth recovery, and my recent studies support this. So I wanted to empirically validate the phenomenon of birth in consciousness and its link to the set and setting parameters. And I did it through the concept of flow, because the phenomenological features of birth in consciousness resemble those of the flow state during intensive physical activity, both thought to rely on the same brain mechanism, transient hypofrontality. Active natural childbirth is one of the most intense physical experiences a person can go through. It demands focus, endurance, and inner strength. So it's not surprising that the core features of the flow state also appear during birth. The flow state scale is a self-report tool that assesses the experience of flow in sports and other physical activity settings. It includes 9 dimensions. We have challenge skill balance, that is when the task is difficult, but I feel capable of meeting it. Action awareness merging, that is when actions happen spontaneously without conscious thought. We have an unambiguous feedback, that is having a sense of how well I am doing. Loss of self-consciousness, that is not worrying about how I appear to others. Autotelic experience, when the activity feels deeply rewarding, and of course, clear goals, concentration on the task, sense of control, and transformation of time. Now I will present findings from 2 of my empirical studies investigating birth in consciousness. In the online study, our main hypothesis was that there would be significant differences in flow states during these different modes of birth. We assumed that natural childbirth would be associated with high flow levels compared to other modes of birth. The participants on the online study were 766 women who had experienced childbirth. The findings confirmed our hypothesis. Women who had natural birth experienced the highest flow state. Concerning maternal well-being, we found that natural birth and flow are both linked to maternal well-being in postpartum, especially when flow is experienced during natural birth. Moreover, when we looked only at natural birth, we found that women who gave birth at home reported stronger flow states. It shows how much the physical setting matters. The environment itself not only supports or interrupt the state of birth and consciousness, it can also amplify it. And when we look at the social setting, the human presence in the room, one-on-one professional support makes a real difference. It's not only linked to physiological birth, as we already know, it also seems to deepen the flow state, turning birth into a more positive and empowering experience. And my second study can confirm my claim that birth experience is not just a modern privilege. We collected data from 138 birthing women in one hospital at 3 time points, during late pregnancy, right after birth, and 2 months after birth. we discovered that the state of birth in consciousness somehow protects the woman from poor mental state in postpartum, even if the birth ended with an emergency cesarean, that is usually a traumatic birth. I think this is a fantastic discovery because it shows that we should address the benefits of the flow mental state, also in hospitals, and convince medical care providers about the importance of enhancing flow during birth, even in births that are more medicalized, because we know that how many women, in Israel it's 99% of the women birth in hospitals because we don't have birth centers. In 10 years from now, 10 years we don't have birth centers, and even before that, many women, most of the women birth in hospitals. Another interesting finding is this. We found that higher flow during physiological birth is linked to shorter second and third stages of birth. This is a new one. The meaning of it that the state of consciousness is also linked to physiological processes in the birth itself, and not only to well-being after birth. Thus, the subjective experience is not a privilege, but it is linked to physical progress in the most crucial stages of birth. And here is another interesting finding. In a standard hospital birth room, we discovered that low lighting correlated with more physiological birth, less perineal tears, and higher flow. All these factors enhance postpartum women's health. So our finding confirmed that birth in consciousness can indeed be understood as a flow state within intense physical activity, and this indirectly supports the idea that its underlying brain mechanism is transient hypofrontality. Modern birth settings often hinder birth in consciousness and disempower women, leading many to experience birth as traumatic. Experiencing birth in consciousness during birthing empowers women, even if the birth ends as an unplanned cesarean, thus promoting well-being in the challenging postpartum period. This is because flow during birth empowers women. In other words, flow during birth, or birth in consciousness, strongly predicts positive outcomes. Here is a model of physiological human birth, which is a psychophysical, social, and cultural event. This complex dynamic shows the ability of many factors to enhance the positive state of consciousness or suppress it. Thus, here is my conclusion. Consciousness studies can enrich how birth is designed, supported, and understood. By reframing human childbirth through the lens of consciousness research, we gain a valuable tool to promote positive birth experiences, which is an unachieved goal in modern obstetrics and public health. And when we speak about transforming birth space, I believe it's ultimately about transforming consciousness itself, because every light, sound, texture, and gesture can either support or disrupt the birthing brain. When we design birth space, we shape not only the environment, but the state of consciousness in which new life begins. So if we wish to make birth better, physiologically and psychologically, and we do, the science of consciousness must be part of the science of birth. Thank you.